Deviated off topic, like I said, of why God does the things He does. And I want to reiterate just very quickly a few things that I went over last week so that we can make it as clear maybe as possible. But God's plan is this. His plan is to bring forth something greater than man in Eden's innocence. His plan is actually to bring forth redeemed man, right? Now this is essential that we understand that we gain more in Jesus than we ever lost in Adam. God wants us to be greater. He wants a positive righteousness. And as I think I wrote it on your sheet there as well. Innocence is like a big old net zero, where it's not great, it's not good, but it's not bad either. God wants something positive out of that. And so He wants a positive righteousness that comes from that. God wants us to be that righteousness. If you look in 2 Corinthians 5:23, it's not that we would become the innocence of Adam in Him, but that we would become the righteousness of God in Him. And so that righteousness is much greater. And I even wrote, as we go down through here, that it's almost like a child. When a child is born, they're very innocent, right? Nothing has really defiled their minds. Nothing has gone. But as we get older, most of the time, I hope, we mold into something greater. We learn from the mistakes. We become better people because of what we've gone through in the past, right? Well, that's kind of like what redeemed man is. Because of what God has done for us, we have been refined and we have been made better. If God had only left us as innocent man, it's almost like there was no reason. I'm trying to phrase this correctly. That there was. Let me read. I don't want to mislead you when I say this because I feel like some people left here with a little bit of confusion. Let me see here if I made this correctly. Gosh, it's just okay. I know it's not often I've lost word. Okay. Well, let me go back. So God,
Just say it.
Hey, let's start with what's the answer to He wants us to be the what?
righteousness.
The righteousness.
What's before that then? He wants
Positive righteousness.
Positive
And
righteousness.
then Jesus and Adam.
Very good. All right, I missed that.
Okay, so I'll just start right there because I don't want. So if God is all powerful, why has He not made this the best possible world? The answer lies in understanding what the best possible world actually is. It's not this world of innocence that we see, but it's the world of redemption. The best possible world is not the world that's never experienced sin and evil, right? Because that's what I was saying with the baby. You're not the best possible that you could possibly be because you've never experienced or never gone through anything. But the world that has been redeemed and rescued from sin and evil is the best possible world. So we have to see that God's work in redemption is greater than that work of creation. And so therefore God, to have allegiance and to have love for all creatures, we are to be more than just robots. Because otherwise, if you don't know what someone's given to you, then there is no way to truly love. And sin and rebellion have been allowed by God, so that our God has allowed actually sin and rebellion. And this is not the best possible world it is, but it is the best possible way that we can get to that.
Filtering process.
Say again?
The filtering
The
process.
filtering process of making you better than what you were to begin with. So just remember that it's not about getting back to Adam's innocence. That's not where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to something better than that. And the only way to do that is through this process of sin and evil in the world to get us to that better point. Does that make sense? Maybe. A roundabout? Not really. So let's go on now to the realignment of nations. As we move closer to this end times, we're going to begin to see some nations begin to form, which have already kind of started happening over the last 300 years. The major realignment since World War II has been incredible because, number one, we see that the British Empire, which has embraced a quarter of the whole world, is now gone. The French Empire is gone. Many nations have now emerged and have been enrolled in the United Nations and have gravitated even towards a get together as a so-called third world that we never saw exist prior to here in the last 300 years. These European nations have been moved forward towards a federal government known as the European Union. Now, this is going to be important as we move forward when I talk about what is going to happen in this nation that's going to form. So today, as we look at prophecy, we're going to begin back in the book of Daniel, in the Daniel chapter 2, about what he says about the nations as he's looking forward. So let's look at Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 through 33. This is where we have to start. This is exactly the same prophecy, or the prophecy where Daniel was talking to Nebuchadnezzar about the dream. And now, if you'll remember, there was a dream that Daniel had as well about the 70th week, and that's where we're going right back to. So when we start about looking at the realignment of nations, this is where we're going to start at the very beginning. So Daniel says, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of the image was of fine gold. Its chest and arms was of silver, its middle and thigh of bronze, and legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." I asked Tracy last night, I said, "Do you remember this story? How many of you remember this, Daniel visioning this statue?" Raise your hand. I want to know. How many of you remember? Very few remember this. This is kind of one of those that kind of doesn't get talked about a lot. This was the first major prophecy that Daniel had been given by God to King Nebuchadnezzar. And if you'll remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of Babylon. He had a dream, and it had disturbed him greatly, and so he called all of his soothsayers, all of his magicians, all of his dream interpreters together and said, "Hey, y'all come here and interpret this dream. But here's the problem. I'm not going to tell you what the dream was, because the assumption is if you can tell me the answer to the dream, then you should also be able to tell me what my dream was." Well, all of them threw up their hands and said, "There's no way we can do that." Well, when Daniel got word of this, Daniel was like, "Hey, hang on, send word to Nebuchadnezzar, don't have all the soothsayers and all the dream interpreters killed. Hang on and let me be the one to interpret it." So Daniel then began to pray. He prayed to God. God then answered his prayer and showed him exactly what Nebuchadnezzar had seen in his dream. And he had seen this statue, a great image, he said, that looked like a man. And he goes on, if we look at this image, now I know that I have no idea exactly what he looked like, but we do know that it was of a man. So in the dream, he had this impressive image, and its head was made of gold, right? Its breasts and arms of silver, its belly was of brass, its legs were of iron, and its feet were of iron and clay. Now the king had dreamed, this is all the Gentile nations of the world. The various details were very significant to each period of time since Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Jesus referred to this in this entire time, from the time of Nebuchadnezzar all the way down until really the second coming of Christ, till the second coming of Christ, as the time of the Gentiles. From Nebuchadnezzar all the way down to the second coming of Christ is the time of the Gentiles. And this is the time in which, if you looked at it, you could really say that the right to world dominion was officially placed to the Gentiles by God. This time that we live in now is the time of the Gentiles. The Jews aren't ruling, are they? No. Is God ruling the nations? No, he will in the millennial kingdom, but he's been given that right to the Gentile nations currently, and that's the time that we live in. What's interesting about this whole Gentile rule was marked by a number of facts about this image. If, without you knowing anything at all about making an image out of different materials, what would you say about this image and how it's made?
Probably broken apart pretty quick.
Why? Clay and
His toes already come off.
how well does clay and iron mix?
They don't.
Not very well. out of all of these metals, now Patrick, you probably can answer this. Which one of these are the strongest if you made it into a statue? What, somebody else answered. Yeah. Notice that they're made in order of how strong they are. So gold is the strongest metal that you have. You then come on down to silver. Then you come down to bronze, which is copper, really. The legs of iron, and then all of a sudden. So this statue was never meant to last, was it? When you're talking about the Gentile world in general, this was never going to hold up for very long because of its composition. Now, I don't want to go into a lot of detail per se about each one of these. If you want to ask me after class, we can. But I want to make sure that you understand that we can look at this statue and we know that the Gentile worlds have already come except for one. Nebuchadnezzar ruled, and Daniel told us that he was the head of gold. He ruled over this whole empire. He was the monarch who started it. And really the dominions of the world, had Nebuchadnezzar taken it, he could have actually ruled the entire world. Secondly, we had the silver chest, which was made up of the Medo-Persian Empire. He doesn't go into it much here, but he will as he gets into chapter 7 and 8 when Daniel looks into this prophecy a little bit more. But the arms represent the two divisions of that empire. So you had the the Median Empire, which is the weaker of the two, and then you had the Persian Empire, which was the stronger of the two. Coming on down to his midsection, he had the brass or copper, if you will, and that symbolized the Greek Empire. Again, little is said about this particular prophecy. He goes on to a little bit more detail in chapter 7 and 8, but we do know that this is the Grecian Empire. For the lines, the legs of iron, there's two of them. This is symbolism of the Roman Empire. It was divided from the west to the east. The east was ruled by Rome, and then the west was ruled by Constantinople. East was ruled by Constantinople, and then west was ruled by Rome. So it was a two division. And then finally, obviously, we come to the toes, which is where we're going to spend a little bit more of our time, because that is where it prophesies in the future. Because we have 2 feet with 10 toes, right? And then as it comes down, Daniel then prophesies, and he doesn't say very little about the coming kingdom, about the Antichrist here. But later on, he will kind of pick that up, and we will here in just a few minutes. But the dream ended very abruptly. It ended with this stone being made cut without hands, which smote the feet of the image, breaking the whole thing into pieces, so that it was blown into oblivion. Then the stone itself became a mountain to fill the earth, a symbolic reference, I guess, that we could say that was coming of the millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ comes, this stone, which it is, made without hands, obviously a significant direction or point to Jesus Christ, comes and it hits the feet and it destroys the statue and is blown to oblivion. And then out of that stone, a whole new world is made. The millennial kingdom is made. And we see that as we go forward. Daniel goes on to say in chapter 7 and 8, and he compares these to several different verses. If you look in chapter 7, several different beasts. He looks in chapter 7, he goes into another description of what each of these empires were. He says that there was a lion with wings like an eagle to begin with, to symbolize the Babylonian captivity. Then a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth. Like I said, I'm not going to go into great detail because this is not where we want to focus most of our time. But it also symbolizes the Medo-Persian Empire. And then we had the belly and thigh with a leopard with 4 heads and 4 sets of fowl wings. And then also here in the last part, which is the Roman Empire, we see a beast with that's unlike anything we've seen before. Obviously, you've not seen any of these before, but the beast comes out of the Roman Empire, which, by the way, is where, and we're going to go with this, the Roman Empire is going to come down. I almost placed this, if I could have moved it down, I would have moved it down into the future where it talks about the Antichrist here and the future kings. He goes on in chapter 8 and he talks about and compares both with the ram and the he-goat. All of these are in correlation with the Medo-Persian and Greece Empire, minus obviously the head and the beast here, or the monster that's mentioned in chapter 8. That monster is where we want to spend a little time as well, because at the very end of it, he says that this will be its final Roman Empire. When we talk about what's coming in the future, we talk about a revived Roman Empire. So you have to ask yourself, where could this revived Roman Empire come from? Many of you heard theories in the past. Where could it possibly have come from that you've heard? Interesting theory. Interesting theory. Not quite. Think about 10 nations.
United Nations.
That's another very good theory. Very good theory. Think about something that has come up since 1957. The forming of the European Union. This has been one of the most strategic things that's happened in history, because as you see this go forward, you see that a nation is arising that's going to be greater than probably a lot of the nations that exist currently. I'm not going to jump too far forward, but this beast that he talks about here, he says that it has 10 horns, just like the 10 toes that he has here for the future empire of the revived Roman Empire. But out of these 10 toes, or out of these 10 horns, one little horn emerges. One little horn emerges. This gives us a clue as to possibly where the Antichrist is going to come from. When we look at the 10 toes and the 10 horns, and we anticipate what the world rule will look like, but yet, like I said, it has not materialized as of now, because you have now a 26, I believe, if I looked correctly this week, 26 or 27 nation empire that is comprised of the European Union. However, it's kind of falling apart and coming together in different conglomerates as we go forward. So out of this, like I said, most people believe that your revived Roman Empire is going to be centered in Rome, possibly, like Jared said, with some sort of, and I hate to even, some sort of religion revolving out of Rome that's going to be occult centered. I'm not saying it's Catholic Church, but there are some theories that have said that, and I don't know exactly how that lines up, but I don't want to go in that direction. But I do know that it will be centered there, because that's where the Antichrist is going to be centered. And it says the European is the beginning of where Daniel actually was going to prophesy for this 10-toe or 10-horn prophecy. Just to speak just briefly, I just looked a little bit of research this week. The European common market today is kind of foreshadowing what's coming. The market was created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Its potential was powerful because what it does is it involves all these nations, and then in 2002, 12 of the 15 member nations become a one currency nation. Now, when you think about going forward, most of you know that the world will have to work on a currency that's common to most countries. Now, this has kind of come up as we look at the euro, and it's kind of fell and not done too well, but it's a good possibility that it could come from here. When you look at the combined population, as of last week, it had a combined population of 512 million people, which is 35% greater than the United States. Should everyone be included in this population of the European Union, it's going to exceed 550 million. So you ask then, what about that little toe? Or what about that little horn? And here's where the important significance is coming from. He says, out of it, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, it springs up the midst of the 10, a strange horn which had eyes like a man's and a mouth speaking great things. The horn tore up 3 of its original horns by the roots. The horn was symbolizing the coming of the Antichrist, obviously, who will rise to power in this new revived Roman Empire, which will be comprised of a 10-nation confederate state, or confederacy. The question I have for you is, why would the horn be little or deemed insignificant to begin with?
This is just my opinion.
Absolutely.
But you get more out of it when they are able to do things. David takes on a Goliath. and kills the beast, there's more to that than if it's Goliath versus Goliath kind of thing. So there'll be, I think it's just for the Antichrist to, be looked at with awe and wonder when this little significant whatever comes up and changes everything, brings peace, restoration.
Okay, so keep in mind that the little horn, you're relating it to Christ. The little horn is related to the Antichrist.
No, I understand that.
So, my thought on this, and it's completely my thought, is that it's going to be deemed kind of insignificant or small was because when he begins his rise to power, he's not going to seem like much to begin with when you look at him in this European Union. He's going to come up and it's going to be very subtle. I don't think it's going to be announced like when someone enters a ballroom in a party, oh, here's the Antichrist, he's here. I think he's going to be deemed insignificant, but notice that he rises above, or he rises and then pulls out from the roots 3 of these other nations. When he overthrows this, his power is actually going to emerge, and he's going to be a force that is definitely going to have to be reckoned with. And so, why do I think he's deemed small at first? Because he's kind of insignificant when it starts to come to power, but then once he shows his mighty strength, it's going to really start overthrowing and really kind of upset that whole part of the world. Now, that kind of takes us from the European Union. But now Ezekiel goes in and he covers a little bit more detail of what other nations we can see that are going to be involved as we move closer to that. I pulled up this map online, and this shows the Islamic nations as they are in percentage basis. So you see here where the majority of the Islamic people are in the world, right? In the Middle East. All the ferment and all the turmoil in the Middle East is from the fact that Israel occupies this small sliver of territory right there on the edge that they believe belongs to them. Now, as I go next week, or maybe it probably not going to be next week, but in a few weeks, I want to talk about the children of Ishmael, which is where the Islamic religion has had its birth. But this all kind of plays into the end time for us. And so the hostilities that we have in the Middle East, they're going to be generated by the rebirth of Israel. And I say this because Israel is going to become a stronger force moving forward. Has Israel been defeated in the past? Absolutely they have. In 1948, when Israel became its own nation, it was kind of an eye-opening moment for most Christians because we now see what God has prophesied, that Israel moving forward will become a nation. Now, how will that nation look halfway through the end time is going to be a different story. But all of these alliances with these Arab nations are going to be crucial as we move forward. There's going to be some prominent nations as we look around this that are going to come upon Israel and going to attack with Israel. And Ezekiel gives us a very good indication of who that's going to be. So let's look at that prophecy in Ezekiel in chapter 38, verse 1 through 3. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy, I think that's what it's supposed to be, against him, and say that thus saith the Lord God, the Lord, thus says the Lord God. So we have 4 nations here, as Ezekiel is prophesying in the future, that we need to consider where they come from. 4 nations. He goes on, let me read this and then I'll come back and behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn you about and put hooks in your jaws, and I will bring you out in all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, a great host, all of them with buckler and shield, wielding swords. Obviously my typing skills need to. Persia, Cush, and Put are with them. All of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his hordes, Beth Togarmah and the uttermost parts of the north with all his hordes. Many people are with you. Many people are with you. Ezekiel lived actually during the time when the fall of the Judean monarchy was there. He spent much of his time again in Babylonian captivity, just as what Daniel had done. And when he began to prophesy in the future, and he foresaw a great anti-Semitic, atheistic northern power that's going to come in the latter days. Now let me say this, and when I say this, I want you to always keep this in mind as we look at this and we spend the next 3 months. Anytime a geographical reference is made in the Bible, it is made in reference to Israel. Anytime a geographical reference is made in the Bible, it is made within reference to Israel. So in the Bible, if it says north, you look at Israel and you go north, south, east, west. So it's always stated in those terms. So when we look at this map and the geographical reference is made, and you start at Israel and you look north of Israel, where could you possibly see the uttermost parts of the north?
Russia.
Noted. I get that. We're going to talk about Turkey here in just a few minutes. Here's Israel. So if we go north of Israel, and if you look that Russia and its great expanse from the Baltic Sea all the way over to the Bering Sea is one of the greatest countries, or the biggest countries in the whole northern hemisphere, nearly, minus China. China's over here too that we got to deal with. But Russia becomes a very interesting fact because of Ezekiel's prophecy. What are you pointing out, John? Oh, here. Oh, Israel.
It's right there next to
The
Georgia.
glare on this. When I look at this, so Israel's right here,
Okay,
right at the
okay.
bottom.
It's like half the size of Arkansas.
Yeah, very, very small.
Yeah.
So now then, you got to ask yourself, who are the alliances with this great power from the north? If we talk about this as Russia, and we look and we see what Ezekiel has and we follow lineage, I'm not going to go into and delve into lineage when we talk about Gog and Magog and we talk about all those, but I am going to tell you exactly where I think most of these come from based upon my studies in the last 2 weeks. And you can go from the pulpit commentary, you can go, there's just a ton of places that point to the same areas when we look at lineage of the identification of Magog, Meshach, Tubal, and Rosh. Not that it's necessarily needed for us to understand Ezekiel's prophecy, but it does come to be very interesting during the final days of the Antichrist when these nations form against the Antichrist. Keep that in mind, against the Antichrist. We're going to stop right here after I show you this. Here are the nations that will be with Russia, Gog and Magog, or that we see. So Russia, all in red, is going to team up with these countries. And this is what Ezekiel said. When we look at this, he says that we have Togarmah, which is Turkey. And I say most scholars believe, and there are some variances here, but when you look at Gomer, nearly all of them agreed that it had some sort of lineage to Germany, maybe possibly northern France. When you look at Iran, we have Persia. What's interesting about these right now? Iran, some of you guys on the back row ought to be able to elaborate a little bit on that. How much do they like Israel?
They're trying to be able to shoot them right now from where they're.
How much does Libya like them?
Nobody over there likes them.
What's interesting, though, is there's going to be 3 countries that come out of this. They're going to ally with Israel against the rest of these forces. Because when I showed you that chart earlier, notice the Islamic world. 3 nations there. Any guesses? I'm going to stop right here, but any guesses of what nations that might align with Israel according to Ezekiel's prophecy? What would you think? It's kind of hard because they're
The
all
Indians hate Iran.
They
So
do.
The Indians would kind of be like, we got the back door. I think the Indians might briefly.
Okay.
You know,
Any
like
other suggestions?
Talking about the three out of those that you were just.
Out of any of
all
these
that.
nations here that you see, yeah, we could even go back, that you would say that would align with Israel and fight against Russia. Any ideas? Okay, we're gonna leave it right there.
Egypt still is kind of like, hey, we don't want to be Islamic, but they're also like, hey, we don't want to be Christian either. You know, they're kind of man created.
I think it's going to surprise you when we say when we come up with what Ezekiel says on this prophecy about who aligns with Israel against Gog and Magog, Russia, and these others. I was going to get into a little bit of lineage here, but I'm not going to. You see the map. This is the areas that we're talking about whenever Ezekiel talks about in chapter 38. Those foes that are come down against the Antichrist. And then there's going to be these three that rise up. Like I said, I'm not going to go any farther on that. Okay, so questions or details before we close?
It's a small little thing about something to the north of Israel there, and that's the nation of Ukraine, or country of Ukraine. Their new president has just come into office.
Yeah.
Has a production company called Servant of the People. Just
Yeah.
a little fact.
I was trying to find Ukraine.
That big orange
Right here, Ukraine. I was looking too far this way. Armenia becomes a very interesting place as well when you look at lineage.
It'd be interesting.
Well, Turkey's known for flip flopping.
Turkey's known for flip-flopping.
Yeah, there's some flip floppers, so you never know when you can trust them or when they're stabbing you in the back.
Well, Turkey clearly aligns with Russia on this to fight against Israel.
Well, France has been an ally of the United States for a while.
Now France becomes interesting, but when we look at when we look at this area, there is a small this area here on the south part of Spain becomes pretty interesting as well. I'll just leave it at that. Next week we're going to talk about the allies that are going to fight against them and why they fight against them. I am not certain, and this is another thing that kind of interested me whenever I looked at this. Germany. I'm not certain why Germany is going to come up with Russia to fight against Israel, other than one thing. Germany doesn't want to be a part of this whole 10-nation confederacy that the Antichrist is going to be over. And so Germany, for some reason, may want to separate out and go with Russia to fight against whatever the Antichrist future holds with that 7-year period. Questions, comments, disagreements?
What about this whole Green New Deal crap? With getting rid of coal and all that stuff? What's Germany's major goal in their the whole thing that
Yeah, I
something
think
happens with that? Not saying that that's even going to go down, but I could see that as a factor. Money. I could see that as a factor for them to side with Russia.
Ezekiel also talks about the reasons for some of this to happen, and it all boils down to money.
Yes, it's always about.
Right. Gold, he talks about gold, and we cannot look at this part of the world and not realize that the oil is here.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm going to stop right there. And we'll pick up next week with their 3 allies and kind of keep going through this. We will roll that into what the nation of Israel is going to look like. We're going to have to go back into the time, and we're going to kind of pull it forward to show you what the nation of Israel is going to go through before the end time, according to Bible prophecy. Okay, that's all I got. Questions, comments? Let's bow our heads.